The wind cut through the empty street as Alara Whitmore stood outside the tall iron gates. The night felt colder than any winter she had ever known. In her hands was a small suitcase, the only thing she was allowed to take. Inside the mansion, bright lights filled the windows. The place that had once been her home now looked like a stranger's house. Behind the gates, Vivian Whitmore watched with a calm, cruel smile. Grant stood beside her, his arms crossed, enjoying the moment. Alara's chest felt tight. She could not understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Only weeks ago, she believed this house was the safest place in her life. Now the guards had already locked the gates. The street was silent. Cars passed without slowing down. No one noticed the young woman standing alone with nowhere to go. Alara wiped the tears from her face. Fear slowly turned into something else, something stronger. She looked one last time at the mansion that had rejected her. In that moment, a quiet promise formed in her heart. The people inside believed her life was over. But they were wrong. One day, she would return to this place. And when that day came, everything would be different. Years earlier, Alara's life had been peaceful and secure. The Whitmore mansion was always full of activity. Business partners visited often, and the house staff kept everything running smoothly. Alara spent most of her days studying, reading in the large library, or walking through the quiet gardens behind the house. Her father, Howard Whitmore, was known as a powerful name in the city's property business. People respected him, and many depended on his decisions. Despite his busy schedule, he always made time for his daughter. He asked about her studies, encouraged her dreams, and reminded her that one day she would build a strong future of her own. After some time, a new chapter began in the household when Howard introduced someone who would soon become part of their family. With her arrival, the atmosphere in the mansion slowly began to change. Polite smiles and formal dinners replaced the warm conversations Alara once shared with her father. Another young member joined the household as well. From the very beginning, the distance between them was clear. Friendly words were rare, and quiet tension filled the long hallways of the mansion. Even so, Alara believed that patience and kindness could keep the family together. The day her father died felt unreal to Alara. The house that was once full of noise and movement became quiet and heavy with sadness. People walked through the hall speaking in low voices. Flowers filled every corner of the living room, sent by business partners and old friends. Alara moved through the days like she was lost in a fog. She had never imagined facing life without her father's guidance. Every room reminded her of him, his office chair, the books he liked, even the smell of his favorite coffee. The funeral brought many important people from the city. Everyone spoke about Howard Whitmore's success, his discipline, and the powerful company he had built over the years. But while people offered condolences, Alara began noticing small things that made her uneasy. Some conversations stopped when she entered the room. Doors closed quickly. Papers were carried in and out of the study by lawyers she had never seen before. Important discussions were happening without her. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere inside the mansion became tense and distant. The warmth that once filled the house disappeared. Decisions were being made quietly behind closed doors. Alara could feel that something was changing around her, and she had no control over it. A few days later, Alara was asked to come to the main living room. The atmosphere felt serious. Several papers were spread across the large table, and two lawyers sat quietly nearby. Vivian spoke calmly, explaining that the company accounts had been reviewed after Howard's passing. She said the records showed unusual activity connected to Alara's name. Grant stood beside her, watching Alara closely, waiting for her reaction. Alara felt confused. She had never been involved in the company's financial decisions. Her father rarely discussed those matters with her. Yet the documents in front of her showed signatures and transactions that appeared to belong to her. She shook her head, insisting that something was wrong. She tried to explain that the signatures could not be hers. But the lawyers remained silent, simply pointing at the pages. Soon the situation grew more serious. Questions began coming from investigators who wanted explanations about the financial records. Rumors spread quickly among business circles. People who once greeted Alara warmly now avoided her calls. Invitations stopped coming. The respect connected to the Whitmore name suddenly turned into doubt and suspicion. Within a short time, the young woman who had grown up in privilege found herself facing accusations she never expected. Later that evening, Alara was told to pack a few personal things from her room. The request sounded calm, but something about the tone made her uneasy. She walked upstairs slowly, looking around the hallway that had once felt familiar. Every step felt heavier than the last. In her room, she opened the closet and placed a few clothes into a small suitcase. Her hands were shaking. She still believed there had been a misunderstanding and that everything would soon be cleared. When she came back downstairs, the atmosphere had completely changed. The house staff avoided eye contact. 2 security guards were standing near the entrance as if they had been waiting. Alara tried to speak, asking for time to explain everything. She reminded them that this had always been her home. But no one listened. The decision had already been made. The front door opened, and the guards moved forward. The cool night air rushed inside as she was guided outside the house. She stepped onto the stone path, still hoping someone would stop the situation. Instead, the door closed firmly behind her. The sound of the heavy gate locking echoed through the quiet street. Alara stood there alone, realizing she no longer had a place to return to. The days that followed were difficult for Alara. She moved from one cheap motel to another, counting every dollar she had left. Some nights she barely slept, worrying about what would happen next. The life she once knew felt very far away. To survive, she took any small job she could find. She cleaned tables in cafes, helped organize shelves in small stores, and sometimes worked late hours doing paperwork for businesses that needed temporary help. The work was tiring, but she refused to give up. One late evening, after finishing a long shift, Alara sat alone in a quiet diner. The place was almost empty. The yellow lights reflected on the window while rain slowly fell outside. Exhaustion and frustration finally caught up with her, and tears rolled down her face. An older man sitting a few tables away noticed her. His name was Victor Calloway. He had been watching quietly for a while, seeing how tired she looked. After a moment, he walked over and spoke kindly. Instead of asking many questions, he simply offered a chance to work at his construction company. For the first time in weeks, Alara felt a small spark of hope. Alara started at the company doing simple office work. She organized files, answered phones, and prepared reports for project managers. Every day she arrived early and stayed late, learning how the business worked from the ground up. After work, she spent hours studying. She read books about property development, accounting, and management. She asked questions whenever she did not understand something. Slowly, people in the company began to notice her determination. Victor watched her progress with quiet pride. He saw that Alara was not only hardworking but also intelligent and careful with decisions. When new projects were planned, he began allowing her to sit in meetings and observe how deals were made. Years passed, and Alara took on more responsibility. She helped organize construction plans, negotiated with suppliers, and managed project budgets. The company started winning larger contracts, and its reputation grew stronger in the industry. When Victor finally decided to step away from the business, he trusted Alara more than anyone else. Leadership of the company passed into her hands. Under her direction, the business expanded into many cities. Buildings rose, investments multiplied, and the company's influence grew steadily. Yet through all her success, one memory remained clear in her mind. Late one evening, while going through old records from the Whitmore estate, Alara found documents she had never seen before. They were hidden among piles of financial papers, almost as if someone had hoped they would never be discovered. As she examined them carefully, a chill ran through her. The numbers did not add up. Large sums of money had been moved from her father's accounts long before he passed away. The transfers were made secretly, and the signatures appeared forged. It became clear that someone had planned this for years. Her father had been unaware of the theft, and the blame had been shifted onto her. All the accusations, all the investigations, had been part of a carefully crafted plan to cover their crime. Alara's heart ached as she realized the truth. Her father had loved her and would never have betrayed her. It had been Vivian and Grant all along, destroying not just her life, but his as well. The anger and hurt she felt were sharp, but beneath it grew a quiet determination. She would not let their lies stand. It was time to confront them and reveal the truth, no matter how long it took or how powerful they thought they were. 20 years had passed since Alara was forced out of the Whitmore mansion. The grand house that once seemed untouchable now showed cracks in its walls, both in structure and in fortune. Their company, once the pride of the city, struggled under debt and poor management. Banks were ready to take control of every asset. Vivian and Grant moved through the office, trying to appear confident. They believed they still had power, that their name alone could protect them. They prepared for the final meeting with the investor who had offered to buy the entire company. The room was silent as the investor entered. Vivian and Grant expected a stern-looking businessman, someone they could underestimate. But the moment he stepped forward, the air shifted. Their faces went pale. It was Alara Whitmore. She stood tall and composed, dressed in a sharp suit that reflected the power she now held. Her presence alone commanded respect. Grant's voice was barely a whisper, "You." Alara smiled calmly, her eyes steady on them. "Yes. Me," she said, her tone quiet but filled with authority. For the first time, she was no longer the girl they had thrown out. She was in control, untouchable, and ready to reclaim everything. Alara set the folder on the polished table and opened it carefully. Inside were papers, bank statements, and signed documents that left no room for doubt. Every transfer, every forged signature, every hidden move by Vivian and Grant was recorded. The door opened suddenly, and federal investigators stepped inside, their presence filling the room with authority. Grant's face turned red with anger, his voice rising. "You planned this," he shouted, pointing at her. Alara remained calm, her hands folded over the folder. "No," she said softly, her eyes steady. "You planned it, 20 years ago," he hissed, the frustration clear in every word. Vivian sank into her chair, her confidence gone, replaced by shock and fear. Within minutes, officials began explaining their actions, detailing how the Whitmore empire had been mismanaged and how they would face legal consequences. Their wealth and control slipped away, leaving them powerless. Alara stepped back, closing the folder and taking a deep breath. A long, quiet calm spread through her. For the first time in decades, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. The girl who had once cried outside the gates was gone. In her place stood a woman who had endured, fought, and won. She owned the gates now, and the truth had finally come to light.